Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome to my icebreaker. I want to focus this morning on 3 topics that have either defined or served as a catalyst for a variety of changes, decisions, and choices I've made within my life. 2 of the topics were my choices. The 3rd topic I just have to deal with, but the choices I make in dealing with it will direct the way I live the remainder of my life. A little background. On January 31st, 1963, my dad decided to hit the road. What that did was leave my mom with 4 kids under the age of 6, and it left me a unique childhood where I was the only male in a home with 11 females. There's some of my roommates. I grew up in a duplex with my mom, my 3 sisters, my grandmother, and in the other half of the duplex was my aunt and my 5 cousins, all girls. If there was one really good lesson from those years, guys, just put down the toilet seat. Life is infinitely easier once you learn and accept that reality. Also, in this life, I was free to make a lot of my own choices. My mom worked as often as she could, 15, 18-hour days. I had a little French grandmother, and I learned by the time I was 6 that I could pretty much pull anything over her eyes. And it led me to make all my own decisions as a child and into my teens. A lot of them weren't very smart. To this day, I'm embarrassed by a lot of them, but for the better part of a decade, drugs dominated my life. All drugs. You name it, I did it. Massive quantities, all the time, 24/7, it's what I lived for. If there was one thing positive from those years that I could take away, was the traveling I did around the United States. I spent 3 years, kind of a Hunter S. Thompson, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, wandering hobo type of situation. I hitchhiked, hopped in vans with friends, left Boston when I was 17 and wound up in LA. I actually got picked up hitchhiking like that, a lot. It was the 70s. People were more trusting back then. I went to Los Angeles for a year, hitchhiked to Phoenix, lived in Phoenix for a year. By then I was about 20 years old. I decided it was time to go back to Boston, get a career, maybe go to college, maybe be a grown-up. So I went to Boston. That's hitchhiking from Phoenix to Boston. Looking like that, I made it in 3 days. That's an idea of how trusting people were back then. That's right along the New Mexico-Arizona border. I got back to Boston. The drugs didn't disappear, they intensified. 2-3 years in Boston, motorcycle crashes, car wrecks, waking up in jail. I developed a complete ambivalence toward life. I didn't care if I lived or died. I was incredibly obsequious. I was the quintessential follower. Hey Joe, let's break into this liquor store. Okay. Joe, let's try this acid. Okay, let's do this, let's do that. I was a follower. I never made my own decisions. I was spineless. I knew I had to get out of Boston. I thought about all the places I visited throughout my travels, and Colorado was calling. Maybe if I came to Colorado, embraced the mountains and outdoors, I would get away from drugs. Anyone who knows anything about addiction, a geographical cure is a fantasy. It doesn't happen. But Colorado was calling, and I came out here in 1982, I believe. Meet Toad. That's me, that's my real hair. Toad was a guy that when I hooked up with in Colorado, he became my employer, my roommate, and my friend. He was also a drug addict, so we clicked. His marriage was splitting up. I moved in with him, and the drug use didn't get better after leaving Boston. It intensified. In September of 1983, Toad climbed into our attic with a handgun, dressed in the suit he got married in, put the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I was responsible for cleaning up after the coroner hauled him away. Something I did, I looked where he sat, where he shot himself, and in the ceiling above in the attic was a hole where the bullet lodged itself. I dug out that bullet and drilled a hole through it and carried it on my keychain for 3 years. That bullet became a seed that grew into a backbone, and the backbone was mine. And I decided at that time I needed another obsession other than drugs. I recall when I first moved to Colorado, I lived in a tent on Pikes Peak. I had no job, no money, but I saw people running, and they told me they were training for the Pikes Peak Marathon. I thought they were crazy, but I thought it was crazy enough that I wanted to become one of them. So I started running. I weighed 260 pounds. 11 months later, at 165 pounds, I completed my first Pikes Peak Marathon. It was the first race I ever ran in my life, and I had a new addiction. Running was now to define me, not drugs. I didn't mention, I know alcohol's a drug, but I didn't quit drinking. Running was also an excuse to drink more. Kept drinking. In 2003, I landed a job photographing the Ironman triathlon in Kona. I came off that island thinking, I need to do one of these. As soon as I got home, they announced the inaugural Ironman Arizona. Didn't know how to swim, didn't have a bike, but I signed up. Lack of knowledge can sometimes compel you to accomplish amazing things. I completed my first Ironman, didn't drown, fell in love with the sport, learned that there were 5 Ironmans in the United States. So in 2006, I signed up for all 5 of them, becoming the first American to complete 5 Ironmans in one summer. I also created what I called my Iron Puppy Project. And what I did with the Iron Puppy Project was raise money for a nonprofit that I'm passionate about, Canine Companions for Independence. Also, 6 years after that first viewing of the Ironman in Kona, I wound up back there competing in the World Championship. I also raised $50,000 for Canine Companions for Independence in the process. Here I am presenting the first check for $22,000, and it later grew to $50,000. Standing on that stage was the coolest experience of my life. I realized I had a lot to live for. I didn't need to wind up with Toad, and I developed a sense of gratitude about what was in my life. I lost my ambivalence about my life. I began volunteering with Achilles International. Every Monday night I guide blind or disabled runners. These people put into perspective how fortunate I am. I've lost my hearing, turning 60, was kind of falling into a middle-aged deaf guy pity party. Had a job at home that at first I thought was wonderful because I didn't have to deal with the public, I didn't have to hear, I didn't have to use phones. It was sucking the life out of me. But I was grateful. I was grateful thanks to working with Achilles athletes and CCI recipients. But I hated my job. So I decided I needed to express my gratitude, and I think the most logical way of doing that would be to run across America. My employer wouldn't give me a leave of absence, so I quit. And this past April, I flew to Boston, and I stood at the harbor on day 1, and when I turned my back on Boston Harbor, my intent was to not stop until I hit the Pacific Ocean. I hit the Pacific Ocean 151 days later, and it was the most incredible experience of my life. Talk about minimalism, everything I own in the world. This is my expression of gratitude when I hit that Pacific Ocean, and I'm grateful for Toastmasters, I'm grateful for all of you. Happy Wednesday. Thank you.